Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the African Apocalypse Q&A panel discussion. This has been organised by the New Black Film Collective in partnership with Home Cinema, BFI Doc Society Fund, BBC Arena and Bertha Foundation. I'm your host for this evening, Brother Hakeem. You're truly in for a treat because we have an esteemed panel this evening to go through this discussion and Q&A. So I'd like to take these few moments to introduce the panel. We have Femi Nylander, co-writer and narrator of African Apocalypse. He's also a filmmaker, poet, actor, an anti-colonial and pan-African activist and organizer of the Cecil Rhodes Must Fall movement. We also have Rob Lemkin, co-writer and director of African Apocalypse. He's an award-winning filmmaker and producer. He has produced over 50 documentaries for the BBC, Channel 4, ITV, Sky, and the History Channel. We also have Lwimbo Kunda, filmmaker, editor, and video artist. She has produced commissioned films for the BBC, B3 Media, and Home. And we also have Otis Thomas, Business Development Director of the African Pot Project based in Moss Side, Manchester, UK. He is also a mentor and youth support worker. And we have Paul Abina, teacher, cultural engagement specialist and author and designer of the Lineage Timeline, which is a learning and teaching tool displaying 9,000 years of African civilization and history. And we have Toyin Agbetu, writer, educator, independent filmmaker, activist, anthropologist, and Pan-African community worker. He is also the founder of Legali, which is a Pan-African human rights organization. And we have Bernard Tafe, not Bernard, my apologies. We have
Bertrand,
thank you for jumping in there. Thank you.
that's all right.
Tafe, Professor of Cultural History, editor, writer, author, and researcher. He is also the executive director of the Humanitarian and Conflict Response Institute. And last but not least, we have Brother Leader Mbandaka, who is the spiritual leader of the Okabwelan Revivalist Movement and UNIA ambassador to the UK. Brother Leader Mbandaka is also an African-centered education consultant. So please, can you all give them a virtual round of applause for taking the time out of being here this evening? I just want to get your opening remarks regarding what your viewpoint is regarding the film African Apocalypse, what your general and initial thoughts were, what you thought about the film, the points that you thought the film was hitting. So I think we go first to Lwimbo. So you're still on mute, Lwimbo.
Hello.
Thank you.
Everyone.
How you doing?
I'm really good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good.
So I just watched the film for the first time today. I actually thought it was really, really good. It's a really powerful film. I've actually recently been thinking about colonialism and how Africa's been portrayed in the media recently. And I think this is a really poignant, a really timely piece. Just looking at like global issues, everything that's on the global stage at the moment. I think it was really poignant. It was just on point in terms of how people feel about colonialism, Rhodes Must Fall, or the statues coming down, like globally. So I just feel like it was a really, really, really interesting. What I really liked about it was, I really liked the direction. I really liked the narration of it. I think it worked really well because it was so personal. A lot of times when you're watching things about Africa or about somewhere that's not really close to home, it's actually just feels far away, but it just felt so personal. And we're going on this personal journey with the narrator, with the poet. So I thought that really I just felt like I was actually going on a journey with the host. So I thought that was really interesting. I just thought, I think the style of it was really good. I think the style of it, the composition, and I really like that they used a poet as well, just to narrate it. I think the poet was, the poetry and the language was really, really moving and really powerful, basically. So those are my initial thoughts on it. Some of the other things, some of the other themes that I thought were really interesting in there. I really liked the archive footage that was used. I don't know where that came from. I'd really love to hear more about the archive footage that was used and where that came. So that was really interesting. And then also bits about the religion, animism, and all these kind of themes. So I'd really love to talk a little bit more about that later on. Just in terms of actually knowing about the themes and about the subjects, I feel like I personally, because it's something of interest to me, I personally know a lot of it, but it's really nice looking at it from a different perspective, looking at it from a more poetic and contemplative perspective, as opposed to just strictly historical, if that makes sense. Anyway, so they're my initial thoughts on it. So yeah,
thank you. Thank you. Professor Bertrand, same question to you, sir.
Well, I was very moved by the film because I'll do a little plug, but I did a book 10 years ago, which actually led to conversation with Rob, the initial ideas when you began the project, Rob. But I thought that the way it's been done was actually in a manner that I couldn't do as a historian. So because I was working on this story for many years myself, but what I could not achieve was the grassroots engagement and the genuine encounters that Femi could manage. So I think from that perspective, the journey for me was actually revelatory and is very much a complete turn. I do encourage you to read my book. It's available for no money at all in secondhand bookshops. But it's what I mean by that is that I learned an awful lot. I discovered a lot about the story. I enjoy the fact that the story has been revitalized in a much more significant fashion than I managed as a historian. So I'm immensely grateful to Femi and Rob for having achieved that, because I thought this is a story that shouldn't die. It's a story that should be kept alive, and there is enough. It shouldn't be kept alive because the perpetrators were interesting at all. That's not the point I'm making. It should be kept alive because, in a way, it's the banality of the commonplace evil of colonialism that the film managed to charter so incredibly well, and the continuities between the extreme brutality of colonization and the brutality of exploitation, which the film makes in the middle, I think is very powerfully made. So one of the things I really enjoyed was particularly that jump into the present, or into the suffering of people who worked in those uranium mines, etc. So I'm very grateful for that film.
Thank you, Professor. Brother Toyin, as an independent filmmaker, and I know you have used the forum and platform and the media of film for your activism. So how did you find the film, sir?
Wow. Well, greetings, everyone, first of all. Thank you for inviting me. Well, the first thing I'd say was that I loved the way it was emotionally honest. It was, I mean, I'm sure we'll cover these topics. There's the scene about kind of like not showing feelings during this and what that means. And that was something that film can do better than any kind of format whatsoever. So that emotional honesty was beautiful, and it was aesthetically beautiful. So when you ask me about how I feel as a filmmaker, it was shot, composed, and very poetically, and that was very enjoyable. The fusion of politics and spirituality is something that's close to my heart, and if you know from my work, but I always believe Pan-Africanism is best placed when those two are synthesized together in a way. So what did I think of the film? I mean, I'm always naughty, as you know. I'm a scholar activist. I'm a nerd, so I'm always going to kind of like be straight up front about how I feel, but of course I'm always courteous because I know that the director and the filmmakers are all here. I did love the film.
Okay, that's why they can take it. I've been
Right.
on the panel before, they can take it. They want to hear honesty.
They want to hear honesty. Okay, well, the great thing is,
Positive, constructive honesty.
oh, it's always going to be constructive. Look, the documenting of a history, of a narrative, of a story that we don't know is always going to be a good thing. That's clearly, and I think we just heard from Bertrand about the uncovering of grassroots narratives. That was something which we owed him a debt for. That was a fantastic piece of work, academically, journalistically, and just from a filmmaker's point of view, get into the heart of those areas. There were a few things that were off key for me, that were off note. So I'm talking about the deference to Vollet. Now, I know that this may not be deliberately like an ode to him. That wasn't the intention. But the reference to his name was a bit off-putting for me personally. It personalized him. It humanized him, whilst every single African I saw on screen, I didn't know their name until the credits come up right at the end. And so there was this kind of denaming of those who were the victims of his crimes, while there was a humanization, which wasn't intentional, I'm sure, of Voulet, which was part of the problem. I mean, there were other things as well, but when I talk about it on the overall, it did a great job. Like I said, it was beautiful in that sense, apart from the slaughtering of the animals. I am a vegetarian, and that wasn't, I'd have liked a warning before that came up. And in some ways, there's a mixed messaging that goes with kind of like showing what would appear to be a savagery out of context of ritual, and presenting the African people in a certain way, which might make them seem a bit more bloodthirsty. I can't think of a better phrase, while juxtaposing that against the barbarity of Voulet. So, I mean, I'll leave it there, and I don't want to get the mixed message. It was honest, it was beautiful, and it's definitely needed, and I thank them for bringing that to the table.
Thank you, Twain. Brother Otis, your viewpoint of things. Again, I know you've worked with young people, with youth, so maybe from an educational point of view, what was your take on for the film?
I thought Femi put together a great production. I liked the certain transitions in the film, such as what they've done with the phone and the wall. It raised some questions that, such as like, was bringing this up causing more good or harm? So like asking them these questions, it was evoking certain emotions amongst the villagers. You could see how much of a traumatic experience it is for them, even though they didn't experience it firsthand, but you can see how much it's still impacting the villagers. But then as we got towards the end of the film and realized that his grave is still there, so they have a constant reminder of it anyway. But what I wanted to ask was questions such as, will any of the profits from the films be going into any programs to help towards the healing of the villagers? Because I feel that's important, that if us from the West have gone there to document their story, and it's evoking certain emotions again, like, are we doing anything towards their healing? I thought it was good the way how you seen Femi's journey. It felt like he was there from a historical perspective, but then it kind of transitioned into a spiritual one, especially around when he was around the baobab tree and the whole thing with Gurnu, is that how it's pronounced? So that was interesting. I'd like to hear more stories from that spiritual perspective. But yeah, overall, I thought it was a good job. It was in depth. It did raise the questions like, who is the film for? Because I feel if you're from an African heritage background, then it was heavy and traumatic, but these stories do need to be told. So I feel maybe it's more for people who are in denial about these stories, but I feel us Black people, from our perspective, we already know that these stories exist, so it's for the benefit of those who are in denial. But yeah, I want to commend Femi on a good production. So yeah.
Thank you, Otis. Over to you, Paul. As a teacher, as a global lecturer, now I know you've actually been to also different regions in Niger. So what was your take on the film, sir? You're on mute. Paul, you're on mute still?
I really, really didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. It was so personal to me. It was brilliant. What I mean, I didn't like it. You know, on these things online now, you say if you like something, I can't like that content. Femi was perfect for the job. When I went to West Africa the first time, all these questions he was putting in of trying to make sense of what he was seeing, I went through. Seeing the slaughter. Now I'm directly mixed parentage, so seeing my mother's people slaughtering my father's people, hearing these accounts, it's really uncomfortable, really, really uncomfortable. But I've got a method to keep it out and put it on a table and analyze it. Personally speaking, for instance, the job that was done on Valet should be done on the likes of Rhodes, of what's it called, the guy down in Bristol. Everybody should know these backgrounds to what these people actually did. I would keep those statues there to teach more and more people about this imbalance and the crimes that were actually done. There were so many points in the documentary which I thought you covered in a very humble, Femi's kind of questioning of almost everything he was seeing. I was like, boy, it made me feel good that there's a young brother coming through who's mustered this kind of information. So respect to both Bertrand and is it Robert? Rob. Respect to that for getting that narrative, because and as well, Toyin, when you talk about the blended politics, spirituality, and that's where it's at for me. But it goes on a deeper level and resonance for me personally, as seeing a thing like that. I would definitely recommend that the documentary to almost anybody and everybody. Understanding the psychology of Paul Valet and his ilk. It links into, at the time, the information they were given, the job they were sent on was basically to build this construct that we now live in. It's the very foundation of it. I'd love, for instance, the same spotlight for Femi to go on a trip of Richard and John Landers and their journey of mapping out the River Niger. Because when he went to Niamey, I had a very weird night. It was New Year's Eve about maybe 10 years ago, maybe long. No, it's longer. It's about 14 years ago. Standing at the hotel he was staying in, overlooking the River Niger, where two Nigerians were there singing Last Christmas by George Michael. And I was like, what the hell am I in here? It was like... It's like a Talking Heads track. It's like go there. So when I try to put to you, I've had all those kind of things. But then I was immediately, Richard and John Landers, 1830s, way before this tracking that you covered so well. I thought I love the use of maps about where we were talking about. I laughed because Niamey doesn't have any electricity, so it gets its electricity from Nigeria. From over the border. So there were things like that for me that in the background, the locusts, the time when the locusts come, you have locusts with honey, that's a delicacy for the people there. There's all kinds of things, that resonances that were brought back for me in watching the thing. So yes, I didn't like it, but I loved it.
Thank you, Paul. As a brother leader in Mbendaka, as a spiritual and community leader, and also I know that you've done tremendous work in the way of the reparations movement as well. So what was your take on the film? And I know that perhaps later on in the discussion, we will get into that side of reparations and solutions. But what was your take on the film initially?
Tenamari. Kuzai Mudzemu Mukuru Rumbidzo Kunamwari Africa. We say, be thankful unto the Creator, give praises unto our ancestors, and the African God reigns supreme. I give thanks for the opportunity to share in this distinguished panel. Ideally, I would love to see the film again to make a deeper, fuller analysis. But my initial thoughts and feelings are to be thankful for the opportunity to connect with our people from a part of the African continent that many of us in the anglicized African world know precious little about in terms of the historical impact of colonialism, the Ma'afa, as it were, the destruction of African humanity on that particular part of the African continent. It gives us an opportunity to invoke the spirits of our ancestors, our great ancestors, and to recognize the blood that has been shed, the slaughtering of African human beings, and to also recognize the suffering of our people in Niger. That is extremely important. I would love to have seen more in terms of our agency. What agency did we demonstrate in regards to the resistance? Anywhere in the world where you find African people under attack, we always demonstrate agency in terms of our resistance, in terms of our healing. I would love to have seen more in respect of that. We don't just lay down and die. We fight back, we stand up, we resist, we build institutions, we build structures. I would love to have had more of an insight into how much of that really happened. But the connection with the spirits, the connection with the environment, the spirit and the energies of the environment, I thought was profoundly important. And just, you know, to hear the voice of our people and to know that the message has been passed on from generation to generation. And what strikes me is how even the young people of Niger today, as it was represented in the film, still feel personally affected, personally moved, how present the atrocities are in their conscious and subconscious thinking. That came across in the film, and I thought that was very, very important. So I'll just leave it there for the moment.
Thank you, Brother Lee Mbandeka. So Femi and Rob, any feedback to our panelists regarding what you've heard?
Yep, for sure. In terms of the question of talking directly to Paul and evoking the name of Paul, that was my idea. But my idea was not to call him Voulet, it was to call him Paul in order to bring him down to the level of I'm not giving you the respect of saying Mr. Voulet. I'm not giving you the respect of calling you Captain. I'm calling you Paul because you don't deserve to be called anything else, right? And I'm even calling you Paul in a very, very, very evocative, kind of snarky way. I'm like, come on, Paul. Come on, what are you doing, Paul? Why do you do this, Paul? Right? It's the idea was to drag him to kind of, firstly, to sit it more kind of, because of the fact, and I can't remember exactly who said it, but they did ask, who is the film for? And documentaries are often for, I mean, Bernard's book, which I read in preparation for the film. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Bernard's book is written for academics, right? A documentary is often for people who are relatively academic and want to sit down and watch something historical. We wanted to make a film that was also going to be for people who are just there on a Friday night and want to watch something a bit dramatic on TV. And to do that, firstly, what we had to do is we had to make it more about, we had to have an antagonist who becomes this Voulet. And that's why when you actually see We Get to the Grave, it's actually Voulet and Shanwan. There's two of them. He has a sidekick, but we kind of had to, the sidekick doesn't get named at all because we wanted to, there's a clear, the danger as well is that you have a clear bad guy and then it's just this bad guy is doing all these things and it's not representative of France or representative of Europe as a whole. And that's what we tried to combat by bringing in the stuff of the neo-colonialism, by bringing in the stuff about what happened afterwards, by bringing in the stuff about Namibia and the stuff about Andaman in Sudan and the rest. But for sure, I think that the Paul element for me was about making sure that this was accessible to a wider audience and had a dramatic element as a film, which meant that people will watch it and talk about it and share it, and more people will be exposed to this true story. And for me, it was like this. I was tracking this guy, and he committed these crimes, but I feel as though, and again, preempting a criticism, and it's a criticism which I thought about all a lot, even when you talk about the use of the book The Heart of Darkness, which is a very, very controversial book, and which only gives one line to Africans in the book itself, right? We wanted to avoid what The Heart of Darkness does, which is to make the whole thing about Marlowe and his relationship to Kurtz, right? The whole thing is about this white explorer and his relationship to Kurtz. And the film could have very easily been just about Femi, not white, but European in many ways, as the film explores, and his relationship to Voulet. And we tried to avoid that by a large bulk of the film actually being the testimony of African schoolgirls, African elders, African young men, the griots singing. We had multiple griots singing throughout the film, giving the story. And I guess it is a shame that in a 1.5 hour film, when you're meeting a lot of people, you can't really name them all directly in the scene. Like with Tashi, we could say I meet Tashi and he's a tree spiritor, but a lot of the times it's just cool. This person speaking, that person speaking the next. But it's a trade-off between fitting in a lot of information into a 1.5 hour edit and not. But I do understand what you mean. We get to the Dankori scene and we say this guy gets a grave, this guy gets a monument. Why do these Europeans get monuments? Why is it the first time that a person has died, it's the white man? And it can be quite that, okay, well, and again, this fits in with Brother Mbandaka's criticism, and it's a criticism that me and Rob have talked about, and that we look back and think maybe we could have done more. Definitely, we could have looked more at the agency, and if it had been a 2 hour film, or even if we'd had a slightly different cut, there was a lot of resistance against Voulet. And part of the reason that the violence was so intense was because there was so much resistance in order to put down this resistance. The only reason that the Europeans were able to win as they did was the superior military technology, which is the same in Andaman, which is the same in many places. And I think Rob has a bit more to say about the about that, because we've spoken about it. If you want to come in, Rob.
Thank you, Femi. I just wanted to announce that in the next few minutes, we will be going to the audience for audience participation. So please, audience members, please get your questions ready so you can pose your questions or statements to the panelists. But please, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. Well, thank you very much to all of you for being so positive and open and frank about the film. I've been taking notes of what you were saying, so I'm just going to try and sort of literally respond to what you what some of you all said. Femi's already talked about the issue of agency. I think that's something that's very true, that people in Niger wanted to talk about the resistance that the forebears had actually put up against the French invading force. And I think that's something that in another version of this film, which we may do for going to Niger, we may be able to bring out more. And that connects a little bit to what Otis was saying. Otis was saying kind of what's being done for the communities there. I think our plan is to be able to take the film, because the film was made, it was made as a BBC and British film, but it was made in the confines of a kind of relatively mainstream film for like BBC Two television. It was made with a certain degree of participatoriness, and so all of the communities that Femi and I saw, and I'd been there twice before going with him, so that was my third trip, so that we had quite an in-depth kind of acquaintance with the communities. All of them were very felt very much, it was very much part of, we were all working together in trying to tell this story. And when we go back there, which I hope we'll be able to do towards the end of next year, we not only will we be showing the film through all of the different places, security permitting, because it's a dangerous place at the moment, Niger, But I think there will be, one of the things that will happen is that we will be building, there is an interest in building a case, a direct case from Niger to France against the French government. There is already kind of the beginnings of an investigation of what French colonialism did in Algeria, and President Macron's ordered an investigation, and not as if that they need to know, but there will be some action, and maybe there will be some legal action, but certainly we'll be trying to find ways, creative ways, in which to actually have the film just essentially enable the film to be part of real concrete action going forward. I think also when the film gets released in France, it will also have a lot of concrete ideas that will come from that. I think what Paul said about the idea that actually the building that colonialism built the construct of the world that we live in now. I mean, that's actually that was really why we made the film. Luimbo was talking about archive. I just sort of briefly would say this that yeah, we worked a lot with French archives, and also we worked with the Nigerian archives, and I think that was the most exciting thing for us, was when the Nigerian archive, we were able to discover this incredible cassette tape of the elderly woman who had been kidnapped by Voulay in 1899, and at the age of 97 was interviewed in 1970 about that experience, because there were many there were hundreds and hundreds of people who women who were kind of kidnapped and conscripted into Voulay's force in this way. So it was that was something that was, I think, kind of an important thing that we were able to, that the Nigerian archive in Niamey we were able to find this tape. The way we actually did it was that actually the cassette was in such bad condition. Luckily, it had been transcribed earlier, and we were able to join up the transcript with the tape in order to be able to understand fully, because the Hausa speakers, both in Niger and here in London or here in the UK, were actually unable to translate it. But luckily, translate it fully. But luckily, in an earlier iteration, someone had transcribed it completely, and that person, although they'd passed away in the meantime, we were able to sort of put it all together. So I think that kind of working with archive, I hope would be something that we would also be able to develop as we keep going. Anyway, I'm kind of trying to address a few different questions, but I'm very pleased that you're all excited by the film. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a question from one of our YouTube viewers, Amani. Their question is, what action has the Nigeria government taken to address how the many victims of this atrocity are memorialized or otherwise remembered?
So I can come in briefly on, so in terms of the relationship between Niger and France and how that has developed in the post-colonial period, you can see in the film the allusion to the French National Uranium Company, which has continued to exploit the people of Niger, Arriva. We don't name it in the film. It's a BBC film. We just call it the French National Company, but I'm sure I can name it in a Zoom call. So you can see that the neo-colonial aspects of France's relationship to its ex-African colonies have often continued in the post-colonial period, and that has often been represented in many cases. We know the cases of Burkina Faso and the murder of Thomas Sankara, who was then replaced with Compaoré. We know, if you look at how many coups there have been in post-colonial French Africa, it's ridiculous. And so even if countries do not have leaders who are necessarily what you might call neo-colonialists, they are very scared sometimes to rock the boat, because there has a long history of military intervention and deposition and installing of new leaders. And so in many ways, in the period since decolonialization, I think that most African nations, especially in the French area, where their national currency, be that the West African franc or the Central African franc, is literally printed in Paris. Their currency is controlled by Paris, and many times they have dependencies on, well, not dependencies, but they are linked in these neo-colonial relationships to the Parisian state. The governments have not necessarily had the opportunity or had the people in power to actively fight for this history. It's often been the people on the ground. One of the people from our film, who you may remember from the scene in Dogunduchi, the guy saying, "We can never forgive, we can never forget," and I speak to him a bit about Albert Camus. He is just run for office in his local municipality and has got in, and he is one of the people interested in possibly bringing a case forward. So I definitely think there is room for movements to be made in that regard. But even in terms of our film and how we had to tread carefully when we went there and filmed, right? You'll notice that we don't go to the Aya Mountains and actually see uranium being mined or anything, because as far as the Nigerian government was aware, we were going to make a film about the historical aspects, because we can't really necessarily rock the boat too much about what's going on today. And so I think it's definitely the case that people like our friend should get into government and push for these things from government, and also push from these things from the grassroots. But I don't know, unless Rob can give some wider breadth, that there has been huge pressure from the Nigerian government as an entity so far in terms of reparatory justice. Do you have anything to add, Rob?
I was wondering whether the question was the question about how the victims of Vule are remembered now. Was that the question, Brother Trevor?
How they're memorialized.
How they're memorialized now. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's something that, you know, in a way they're not, I think people feel angry that they're not memorialized as in the way that they were. But it has to be said that, you know, people in Niger since 1900, since 1899, are kind of living lives of incredible kind of attempts at survival. I think one of the things, without going into sort of a huge amount of kind of abstract information, and Bertrand would know about this from his book as well, of course, one of the places where it is memorialized is in relation to a queen called Queen Sarayunia. And there's an amazing film made in the 1980s called Sarayunia, made by a Mauritanian French director called Med Hondo, which is about the resistance of the Hausa people to the French invaders. And in the villages called Lugu, where there are quite strong connections between French NGOs and the Nigerian community there. There's a lot of memorializing there. And this character, Queen Sarayunia, was a person who basically led her troops against Vule in a very, very fierce battle. Now, we actually filmed there, and we did a lot of filming, but I mean, you know, it's a 90-minute film, and it was a scene that didn't quite work as well as other scenes. But in terms of memorializing the resistance, but B, the kind of the reality of that history in Niger, Sarayunia is a kind of national figure. So like every year they have a kind of I think it marks independence. Every year they have an independence kind of celebration in different cities around the country of Niger, and always there is a kind of a figure that plays the part of Queen Sarayunia. But actually there is the Queen Sarayunia, although at her time she was the queen of a kind of a kind of a mini civilization in that part of what is now on the border between Niger and Nigeria. And there were tens of thousands of people living there. It's now very sparse. There's not very many people living there. And the place is, people are kind of just struggling to get water. I mean, really just basic, really water and food. But there is a Queen Sarayunia there now. And in fact, we met her. And maybe as we've now finished the film and, you know, we've done all the sort of basics of making the first film, maybe we'll get to a point where we can sort of add to that material and put other material online or into a DVD or whatever that would include the material about that. So, but I think that, you know, I also just one last thing I'll just say is that I hope that, and this maybe goes back to Otis's point, is that I hope also that actually the archive, which is immense from what the archive of interviews of people, which is much, much greater than obviously than what was in the film. We hope that will be some kind of resource which will be there in Niger, and which the communities will be able to, the people in Niger will be able to access, you know, in some kind of public way, and that may in itself also contribute to some kind of memorialization.
Thank you, Rob. Bertrand, I saw that you had your hand up. Did you want to contribute?
I wanted to raise the Sanuya particular issue, but also I wanted to raise I think an important issue, which is that the Voulay Chanoine massacres that are documented in the film are only a fraction of a much longer story, because the expedition carries on into Chad, and Voulay's massacres before are not talked about in the film, but he was actually, this is a man who set Ouagadougou on fire just a year before. So there's a much bigger story, a much longer story, and I think there's a danger potentially in just highlighting a set of horrible massacres. But part of the problem is that there were many other massacres, and there is a moment, I think, in colonialism and colonization where such massacres become unfathomable or unacceptable, and that is the moment of Voulay Chanoine. That's that particular juncture. But there's a hinterland of massacres before, and of extreme violence before, that gets completely ignored. So I think in the commemorative process, there's always a danger in highlighting a singular scandal or a singular set of massacres, but to forget that there was actually a much bigger colonial set of colonial violence, which the film, to be fair, makes direct references to. But within West Africa, there is a range of other atrocities that match in intensity what Voulay committed.
Well, Bertrand, because I actually wanted to bring in the rest of the panel with this next question, this next point. So what are the other lasting impacts and living negative legacy of colonialism that we still suffer from today? And I'm just throwing that open to the panelists, to all of you.
1884, 1885, the construct was made, and that's the map of Africa itself that we see today. So what I love about what Bertrand's just said, the actual carving out, the carving out of the African map was not done by someone, a cartographer, going like, oh, we'll have this here and whatever. There was a lot of bloodshed. There was international rivalry between the European nations. And they didn't arrive at those conclusions of a border in Berlin just by let's draw a line. So on the practical grounds, there's a lot of work that maybe needs to be done about understanding these atrocities, the actual the violence that was meted out to come to bring these things into being. And each of them had a different way. For instance, look, if you look at what happened with ECOWAS, the Economic Union of West Africa, it was the dissenting voices in generally were the French, the French colonized countries, because they, in many cases, think they're French. And that's one of the, Dr. Morgan Dalphinus flagged this about the difference between the colonizers and the enslavers, between the British, the French, and the Portuguese, and etc. That the French taught their charges that they were French. They were much more sophisticated in their approach. So looking at that, how these things get, and by the way, the same year, 1884, where the Berlin Conference took place, with the treaty signed 1885, 1884 is the same year that the European nations met in Washington, DC, and set Greenwich as prime meridian 0 for the time, for the keeping of time across the world that we use today. So sorry, that's what I would say anyway.
Thank you. And
I'd like to add something on that. I mean, one of the things. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, you're coming through fine, sir.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. There was a crossover. Okay. I mean, one of the things that I'm wary about, one of the things that really kind of touched my heart and quite painfully was when one of the elders spoke about impotence. And that's a danger. This is a beautiful film. It's a historical piece of work. And there's a danger of inscribing this idea of European omnipotence, like it's power. It can create all these massacres. And Africans lack agency, are just impotent. And that's kind of like why I was kind of like hinting towards the naming situation. I wasn't actually talking about specifically verbalizing the names. I appreciate with 90 minutes, that'd be difficult. I thought about perhaps just captions underneath them. Because I remember there was a scene in the Black Panther movie when I think the main protagonist uses the term colonizer, and everyone in the cinema just laughs because instantly with one word, it dehumanized an amoral aggressor. And everyone understands the context. They haven't given them the privilege of their name. And it was a very clever, use of language. And, so that's just that context on there. The only thing that I would like to ask of both Femi and Rob was I noticed there was some confusion over identity. There was a blurring of lines between the idea of being a European and being an African, of being English, of being Nigerian. And it was interesting to observe. I am an African. I have Nigerian heritage. I'm a Yoruba man, but I'm not English, even though I was born in England. I'm not a European, even though I live in Europe. In fact, Britain, which just left the European Union. It's very confusing, but to see that in a film which is so powerful.
Sorry, Toy. There is a question that I will tie into that last comment that you made.
Okay, I'll leave it there.
Answer, because there is a question from Nigel that was asking a similar thing. But if you can kind of put in the context of also the lasting impacts of colonialism.
The lasting impacts is this internalization of what I was talking about, that somehow Africans were impotent and Europeans are omnipotent. And I've just learned today of Queen Sarayina. I've never heard this name before. And this should have been one of the legacies of the film for me personally as a Pan-Africanist, to actually learn of more agency, of more stories, more narratives. Now, I'm so thankful that you said that, you're going to perhaps release outtakes and use them as learning resources, because that's what them children needed. When I was watching those scenes with those children, as a parent, my heart was being torn, because what was happening, they were internalizing the pain of their ancestors without having an outlet, without having a sense that their ancestors fought back, that they had any other option than to hope that their oppressors and the benefactors of their oppressors will have the good conscience of recognizing what they did was wrong. Producing the film, producing even an educational learning resource from those outtakes is a way of doing some reparative justice today. And I like that notion. I like the idea of somebody challenging the French government on this position today, because I think, Femi, you summed it up right. And Rob, you introduced that quote, this whole idea that what happened then set the framework of the neocolonial system that we're living under today. And that's really, I think, as an activist, what I want to see change. And I do believe that film has that means of doing it. The last thing I'll say, and I'm sorry, time-wise, there was one elder, and this was quite a beautiful scene again, where he spoke about his aunt. So he used the tradition of griots, and he went back and found his ancestors and shared a narrative which we wouldn't have had access to, the two of you hadn't done this fantastic work. This is part of the reason why I wanted the names on it, because you see, even when he joins the ancestral realm, if the film had actually named him, and so we could actually, and him as well, his family could continue that work. But what happens when he's not named and he's just someone whose aunt saw something, it goes into the ever. And so this is where I think that those of us who in positions of privilege, where we have access to these cameras, these high definition materials, these resources, access to the archives, we have to think a little bit more strategically and take on, it's a burden, I'll admit, it's not fair, but we do have a responsibility to take on and make those changes to the world that we live in today. And I hope, Brother Hakeem, that answers kind of what you was asking of me, how it links to the issues.
Thank you, Twain. Do we have one more comment from one of the other panelists regarding the lasting legacy? Yes, sir, Brother Tnbfc, you can unmute.
Tenai Mari. Yes, I appreciate the last remarks from Brother Toyin, and especially where he emphasizes about the blurring of lines between Europeans and Africans. In fact, I thought it related to lasting legacy, in the sense that I think that is one of the evidence of the lasting legacy. There's a line in the film where my good brother's narrative referred to someone who referred to Volé as a son of Europe, and Brother Femi ventured to suggest that he is also a son of Europe and a beneficiary of empire. Well, we're not sons and daughters of Europe, we're sons and daughters of Africa. And we're not beneficiaries of European empire. We are, in fact, benefactors of European empire. And I think that also is part of the legacy of confusion that, you know, it has been left with us. Terms like animism to refer to African spirituality. I think those are terms that are very problematic because it alludes to the idea of African people being savages. You know, you have Muslims, you have Christians, and you have animists. It's a term I'm very, very uncomfortable with. And I didn't like that line where some elders who appeared to be practicing Muslims, it wasn't clear that they were practicing African spirituality, not to me anyway. And they were asked, well, why didn't the spirits protect them? You know, you wouldn't have asked a Muslim, why didn't Allah protect you? Why you didn't have asked a Christian, why didn't Jesus protect you? Because that would probably be presumed to be disrespectful. May I just add one, may I just crown that point? I know we haven't got a great deal of time. There's also, in terms of lasting legacy, the stranglehold that France continues to have on so-called Francophone African nations, to the point that Francophone African nations, so-called, are forced to pay dues to France for the benefits of colonialism. 65% or 70% of their foreign exchange reserve has to be lodged in the French treasury, for example. And we could go on and on. The institutions of Europe that continue to have prevalence on the African continent, that confounds African politics, confounds African law, African economics, African social order, African culture, and in the end, African identity and African agency. Those are lasting legacies.
All right, brother leader, brother leader, I'm so sorry. The Paris Club. Please look up the role of the Paris Club, because that's where they set the.
Yes, I'm aware. Yes, I'm aware of the Paris Club. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, brother leader Madaka. Femi, I don't know if you want to come back on any of those points.
I'll come back, and I've seen Nigel's question in the chat about the journey changing Oxford and Britain, so I can tie that in.
I think that question ties in also to some of these points.
On the question of the son of Europe, I mean, if you saw my brother, then it would be much more obvious, because he's about the same color as Paul, but I'm of mixed heritage. So my mum is mixed race, and and my dad is fully Nigerian. So I have my grandma, and it's actually, we did film a scene at my grandma's place in Camberley, but it never made it to the final film of me interacting with my grandma, because in a way I am a direct descendant of Europeans. 1/4 of I'm very dark skinned. It doesn't present, it's not obvious, but I am directly bloodline descendants of Europeans as well. But
may I make a quick interjection here? May I make a quick interjection here?
Yeah, of course.
But that wasn't clear in the film.
No, it wasn't clear in the film. No, but that wasn't the point I was making. It wasn't the point I was making completely. The point I was making is that when I went to Niger, I went with my Nigerian passport because it was an ECOWAS nation and I could travel there without a visa. However, with my Nigerian passport in general, I can get into maybe 30, 40 countries in the world visa-free. With my British passport, I can get into 160, 170. That's a privilege I have as someone who is from the diaspora, who was born in Britain. those of us who are born in Britain, a lot of us send remittance payments home because of the fact that we have higher salaries than those of the people back at home because of our proximity to the colonial metropole. Being and of course, there's a huge range of people from different backgrounds within the metropole. There are those who are of model minority backgrounds who have better off upbringings. There are those who are basically undocumented and are basically waiting to, or even not undocumented. We've seen the Windrush scandal. You came here at the age of 4, you thought you were a citizen, and then they deport you the next day, right? So of course I personally am still a victim of colonialism. However, being here gives me a proximity to the colonial metropole, which gives me privileges that those people don't have, which is why I got funding from the BBC and the BFI to make a film about Nigerian history, rather than, because I'm an Oxford graduate from the UK, rather than a Nigerian person being the narrator of this film, right? And that was the point I was trying to make. I understand what you're saying. It's not clear from the film that I have European ancestry, and if that point had been made clear, then the line would have made a lot more sense. But the point was twofold. It was that, and it was also the fact that I personally feel I have a lot of even the fact that I speak English like I speak English. I speak English like I speak English, and that allows me a privilege in certain things. If I speak patois, then I don't get access to certain jobs. I don't get access to certain things. If I speak pidgin English, I don't have access to the same networks, right? All the privileges which come from the colonial metropole, those of us who are in some kind of proximity to, have a degree but that, as I say, it comes with a responsibility. If I've benefited from it, how can I make sure that I use the fact I've benefited from it to fight it clearly, and to help those who aren't. And that was the point I was trying to make there. In terms of how it has changed my relationship with Oxford and Britain, it's definitely changed my relationship with Oxford and Britain. You can see throughout the film how much the overall journey as well of understanding about colonialism, which started from Rhodes Must Fall in Oxford, and has now kind of this film is a part of it, and it's going to be ongoing. It involves working with IDPAD coalition in London. It involves doing all sorts of things. Has made me see Britain in a whole different light. At school, I wasn't taught about colonial history. I didn't really know about colonial history. They taught us about slavery, but they taught us about slavery in America. They didn't tell us about British slaves in the Caribbean. And I just didn't have the concept of the place that I lived as the place that had actively oppressed and gained all the wealth it has from my ancestors and my brethren and my brothers and sisters. And now I do. And so in that same way, you see yourself as kind of a sneaker agent. You're here in the metropole and you're getting benefits from being in the metropole, but you're also trying to take Babylon down, as so to speak. And so, yeah, I hope that kind of answers. There was another facet to the questions as well, right, that I'm forgetting.
Well, I think you covered Nigel's question, but there was also a question from Nadine, who would like to know more about Amina and Hassan. How key were they as guides to be able to complete your film? So they just wanted a further elaboration on their involvement. Mm-hmm. Also,
Amina and Hassan
before you answer that, Femi, tech support, after this question and after this answer, we can go to Amma, who wants to interact with the panel. Thank you. Go ahead, Femi.
Yeah, so Amina and Hassan were great. They were there throughout. I'd learned a bit of Hausa by the end, but my Hausa was nowhere near good enough to be doing investigative journalism with. And so they were there as translators. They were there as educators. They were there. Amina is a filmmaker in her own right. She has filmed, obviously, one of the most poignant scenes of the film, this film with the Nigerian mine workers from the uranium company are literally friends of Amina's father, Amina and Hassan were very, 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 very great guides, and I spent a lot of time with them and got to know them in a way that couldn't really be elaborated in the film in great depth, because I remember Rob once said, when we were putting together the scene for the when we were filming actually the scene of the motorbikes, he said, right, we need to make sure this doesn't look like a romance scene, because this can't be a film about, right? So the whole because we were both on motorbikes with like wind in the air, right? Because it's the point of the film had to be the people of Niger, and Amina and Hassan were gateways into the people of Niger. But I had a whole, I mean, they taught me a lot about the country, and they were both actually from the north of the country, not the road we were traveling. They were both from Amina was from the Air Mountains, where the uranium is actually mined, and Hassan is also Tamashek, which is a different ethnic group than the Hausa or the Zalma people. I mean, you don't really see many Zalma people in the film, but the victims of Vule were generally Zalma or Hausa. So they actually exposed me to another culture of Niger that obviously I wasn't, and a culture of North Africa in general, the Tamashek culture, that I wasn't really able, that obviously isn't in the film. So I could tell you lots of stuff about my interactions with them, but I'd be talking for days.
Thank you, Femi. Thank you. Amma, are you ready to go live?
Hi, my name's Amma. I think you can all see. First of all, Femi and everyone else who was involved in making the film, thank you very much for uncovering another part of our hidden histories as Africans. And there are so many, and there are so many massacres that have happened. And all of them are unacceptable, because I think I heard somebody say all of them, everything that's been done is unacceptable. Just a few comments, and there's a lot I could say, but I'll try and keep it brief. Few comments and a question at the end is, I'd like to thank you for including, I'll use the term, the wisdom of the women, and particularly that young girl who, that's the point. I always find these films difficult to watch, but that's the point at which tears came to my mind. Just to emphasize what Toyin said, just the caption of the names of the peoples of everyone who spoke. And the reason why I'm saying that is because that's the way we as Africans get written out of history, particularly our women. And it's a very good film for me, but I just feel that if it had been a film about, I don't know, people in, I don't know, European people, anywhere else, just the caption of their name. So for the next film, if you can just put a caption which says the name of the person, it is so important. Our names are constantly written out of history. And then to emphasize, which I think Brother Leader Mbaka said, resistance. It is so important whenever we're talking about the history of African peoples that we highlight the resistance. We know there would have been resistance. And I know you had a short space of time, but it is so important in the telling of the history. So my question or query is, because I'm always concerned when we, and I've got more concern as I get over, when we write, or when some of us write, or we make films, how they remain what I call closeted. So what I would like to know is how this film is going to be taken out to the wider communities of Africans at the grassroots, both in the UK, you've talked about France and the rest of the Western world, but in particular within Africa. And I'm not just talking about Niger, I'm talking about Niger, Nigeria, Benin, Togo, Ghana. I can go along the whole West African coast. I can go down to the east, across to everybody in Africa. I have people who, if I had access to the film, I could share it with, who would watch this film. They watch documentaries, they will disseminate, they will take bits of it. And then my other question would be, for those of us who are African in this discussion, I just really want to emphasize that this is real, raw life. And I cannot put into words the pain that the majority of us feel every time we say, I struggled with whether I was going to watch this tonight, but I always say I have a duty to my ancestors, because it is pain and it was real raw life. And then I suppose my final point is,
but in fact, Amo, the point you just raised there was actually going to be one of the points of the final question that will be put to the panel regarding solution.
And then my final point is about continuing the narrative, because we come together, we're in Zoom, and everyone wants a Zoom meeting nowadays, and we all talk and we ask questions. But Femi, just you know, are there ways in which those of us who have an interest and those who are actually not in this Zoom meeting today, how we can continue the narrative with you, learn from you, build the network? I suppose that's what I'm talking about. And once
learn
again,
from me.
I
need to be learning from you guys. You guys are the elders. As they learn from me, I need to be learning from you guys. You guys are the elders.
Learning is a two-way process.
Indeed.
That's right. Go ahead, Emma. So thank you so much for your statements. Thank you so much for your question, Emma. Thank you. So, Femi, I don't know if you wanted to address, and Rob, if you want to address the first point.
One thing I would say just briefly to Emma's question is that actually there's a group that we work with here in Oxford called African Families in the UK, which is based in Oxford, but also in other towns. There's a branch in Swindon and Luton. And we are actually for January, maybe February, I don't know, organising a Hausa screening. So that, because there's many Hausa speakers, mostly Nigerian, but there are also some Nigerian Hausa speakers in the UK as well, but not so many. And so we're organising a Hausa screening later, and there will be some kind of event that would be like this, but actually it will be for people who are more comfortable in kind of debating all of this and discussing it in Hausa. So I think that's going to be a very important event whenever that is. I think that we hope to, but we don't know whether the film will be selected. We hope that it might get selected for the film festival in Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso. Bertrand mentioned that Voulet also was well known in Ouagadougou. I think he was known as the Inferno of Ouagadougou. So there's a history of this particular story and Ouagadougou. So if it goes to that film festival, which our Nigerian partners are putting together at the moment, if it goes to that, then that will probably form the basis of what could be a tour of some sort around Burkina Faso, Mali, Benin, other Ghana, other countries, Senegal, other countries in that area. I think that's all I have to say on that one.
Okay.
Hakeem, could I just ask something of Brother Femi? Because what happened was Dr. Femi Biko, your namesake, he described about Murtala Muhammad Airport in Lagos. He said that you could always tell who the Africans were who were coming from the UK because they started to defrost when they hit the Nigerian air. One thing I found really, really interesting was the fact that you were asked about your non-response to the stories you were told. And I was looking at you saying, yes, lad, I think you did well there, lad. Because I was looking about the way you responded was how I was trained not to respond because I was trained as a fighter. And so when they were asking you, I'm interested in how it felt for you when you were asked, why don't you respond to the stories on our drama?
Cool. I'll make a point to Amaz and then I'll respond to Paul. Okay. In terms of what I'm trying to do in terms of getting it out necessarily, and want to make sure that when we do manage to get a French release, once we've sorted out French distribution, I want to make sure that it's again stuff that we're doing right now with having this screening with the New Black Film Collective in order to make sure that the people who aren't going to be necessarily at the BFI Film Festival but who need to see the film see it. and I want to do the same thing with France. And I want to make a trip at some point, Corona allowing, if I can. I've been working on my French, so hopefully it'll be good enough. I want to go and try and meet with some of the people who are kind of organizing Justice for Amadou, who are organizing the parallel movements in Paris and in France in general, to what's going on in the UK. And if we can start to build those connections, and hopefully similar showings like this can be happening in France, and it won't just be kind of the Parisian French kind of cinema elite who see the film, or people who are on, or who watch Arte shows. We can actually do targeted outreach to, as we're doing here in the UK, to Black and African communities in France. And then obviously in the longer term, for sure, we need to think about how we're going to get it out across Africa, and how we're going to make sure it's affordable and viewable on the continent as well. Has Paul? Yeah, he's cool. Paul's still there. Someone dropped off the call. I didn't know who it was. Paul, in terms of what you said, yeah, it was obviously shocking. You can see on my face. Well, not shocking. It was obviously kind of like a big thing to be hit with. And you can see on my face, I'm kind of squirming a bit in the scene. But I think it's important. I think it's important that we kept it in the final cut, because for me, the question also is kind of was to the degree, if I start making the thing about it's this idea of what I said earlier about Marlowe and Kurtz, and all of it becoming about the internal struggle of me and how sad I am responding. Right, these people have their own emotions that they need to show, and they have a real, very, very, very deep proximity to that history, and I kind of think that the stoicism to which they referred is more me trying to put on a face that allows me to that it's kind of, what is it my place to start wailing and weeping and doing the kind of no, well, what's good, when these people themselves, in many of the earlier scenes at least, are quite contained, and they know this history and they're recounting it. And it's actually the later scenes, after I've spoken with Amina and Hassan, the uranium miner, where the uranium miner starts to cry with the schoolgirls, where a lot more of the people kind of lose that brave face. And Amina says it in Dogun Duchi. She says we tend to be quite in Niger, we tend to be quite cool, let it all to God, it's at the rest. But I was surprised to see the rage of these people, and there was a lot of rage. But earlier on in the journey, there wasn't as much kind of, I mean, there wasn't as, I kind of felt as though I had to be a bit stoic to allow the interlocutors on that side to be able to display what they were feeling. And I think Amina and Hassan put me right in that respect and said, no, you need to interact rather than, see yourself as a reporter.
Well, did you see the Anton Ferdinand racism program? Because
I haven't.
Because in there he went to see a psychologist, and she got brought out. She said that a response to racism is usually silence. And it's just that I know growing up, because I was isolated on my own in a town overwhelming numbers, I just went quiet, and then I'd switch into violence very, very effectively. But I was trying, when they were talking to you, I was literally saying, what are they asking him that for? I didn't identify, and so I was like kind of on your side, and I was saying, we ain't done anything wrong. But I had the same kind of dynamics when I was there myself in both Niger and Nigeria. There's a kind of they'll pick up a nonverbal vibe that when we're in the cold of Europe, it doesn't. We get used to it.
Yeah. Maybe the coldness of the climate makes us cold.
Well, no, seriously, that really, really touched. That's why I didn't like it, because you awoke things in there. Your responses awoke things in me where I was going like, damn, now I get, Now I get Femi Biko. Now I get, yeah, I remember this and I remember that.
Okay, leading on from that point, because we're coming very close where we're going to have to start wrapping things up. So I want to again put this point to the panelists. You know, with the current political and economical situation we see Africa in, with some of the points that was articulated regarding the lasting legacy of colonialism, what do you think the solutions are for the healing, especially when we're talking about spiritual, emotional, and even physical healing for Africans in Africa and throughout the diaspora? What do we think are the economical solutions for Africa, considering that Africa, gives 30 to 40% of the world's raw resources, but doesn't benefit from that? You know, there is the AU, there is the African Union. So Africa has a voice, it has a mouth, but Africa doesn't have a bite with that mouth. There's no real African bite on the global political level. So what do you think are the solutions for the healing and the empowerment for Africa and Africans throughout the diaspora? Sorry, Paul. Considering what Sister Amma said, I do want to go to our sister first, Luimbo.
Ouch.
Hello, how you doing? No, I've really enjoyed this. I know we're going to be going soon, but I just want to say I really enjoyed the conversation. It's been really enlightening, and yeah, well, just getting back to what you were saying about what I think that we can do. While I think it's really important for us to sort of remember the atrocities of colonialism, I also think it's important, first of all, to center the people. Rather than centering ourselves in the conversation and in the narrative, we need to center those people in the narrative to make sure it's their stories and it's actually something that's in the forefront of their minds, because it's like we're going there and asking them these questions and dredging up all these things, but it's like, is that actually where they are at the moment in terms of their healing? So we didn't really, I mean, obviously it did go into it in the film, but I'd really like to know whether it's something that is sort of on their minds now, or if it's poignant and where they feel that they are in their healing. I also think that I think someone talked about it before, but it's talking about how we look at the positive things that have come out of colonialism as well. I know it's very negative and there's a lot of atrocities, but I feel like our resilience, or the resilience of African people and what people have actually achieved is diminished a lot. And the narrative is all around how Africa's struggling, how Africa is, you know, there's a lot of wars and a lot of negativity going on. But I feel like in terms of our healing, we do need to actually really look in and see how we have been resilient, see how we have resisted. And those stories as well need to come out, as well as the stories of the atrocities. We need to think about the stories, the positive stories, the positive things that have come out of it. So I think that was that. In terms of the economy, I was thinking in terms of the economy, I feel like Africa needs to worry about itself. There's a lot of things, a lot of systems that were set up at the end of colonialism in terms of like the economies, how they farm out, how they deal with different countries. A lot of things that were set up then have not been working for us. And I feel like we really need to focus on ourselves. And I feel like it's kind of a turning point. I feel like with coronavirus and all these types of things, Britain leaving the EU, I feel like it's an opportunity for Africa to actually assert itself and make capitalize on an opportunity that we have at the moment to really focus on ourselves and maybe trade internally as opposed to trading internationally, and see how that works. Anyway, that's an idea that I had. So thank you.
Thank you, Luimbo. Brother Otis, over to yourself, sir.
Yes, brother. So yeah, I'm part of many initiatives that are providing numerous solutions. During the film, and as part of the poll, they was asking about reparations, and I did notice that they displayed a slave plantation which was producing rubber for tires. I wasn't sure if that plantation is still profiting to this day and if they're being held accountable. But although we should be asking for reparations. I don't think we should be dependent on it. We need to provide for ourselves and create solutions for ourselves. I feel Dr. Arikana Chimbok, I can't pronounce the name, but who was part of the AU, and she called out France for taking 500 billion from Africa, West Africa every year. Like they need to be held accountable. I think one of the solutions that they're putting forward is for what's called the African Trade Values Corridor. So it's for trade from East Africa to West Africa. And now that we've got the African Free Trade Agreement kicking in from January, this is a great opportunity for Africa to flourish in regards to internal trade amongst ourselves. I feel it's imperative that us in the diaspora with the skills to assist with the development in Africa need to come together with those in the motherland, and we all need to merge, and it's time for us to go back home and build back up Africa. And I advise everyone to check out the African Diaspora Development Institute, which is Dr. Arikana's organization. The website's www.ourade.org. Also, I've seen someone post in the chat about the Lumi currency, which I'm aware of. They're providing another solution. I'm also part of another Pan-African cryptocurrency called Sable Ascent, which is also providing solutions. So I feel now is a good time with the technological advancements that we have in place for us to be able to reap the benefits of it and take control of our future. And there's no time like the present, and I'm very optimistic about the future, and I'm happy with the way things are coming along.
Beautiful. Thank you, Otis. Those links, if you can even put them in the chat, and also if you can forward them on to Priscilla, that would be really appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, I'll put them in the chat.
Thank you, sir. Brother Toyin, solution, way forward, upliftment, healing, empowerment.
Yeah, no, not easy, right? Okay, where do I start? Okay, I'll try and summarize quick. Everyone has their own gift. That's always been my belief. And so we're all going to have different specialisms, different things we can contribute towards the problem to make a solution. So for me to kind of like say there's a universal panacea to all this is a nonsense. So I'm going to talk in the context of the filmmakers. And I'm sorry to put more stuff on your shoulders, and I'm not trying to do that, but I'm perhaps talking not just to you, but just as guidance for all filmmakers who are in this particular field trying to do this work. So solutions, the first thing I would say as a community educator is education. So I would say that the immediate thing is when you get the time, a director's recut, do you know what I mean? This could be years down the line, put those captions on, perhaps remove that dowry scene, which didn't have any context around it, with the Queen Saratina. I haven't got the name quite, but that is more important. Sarina, thank you. It's very important to have that scene in there, and then you had to select, always make it, 1 hour 45 minutes longer. But it's important to have agency and make people see that agency. There's a montage with the pounding, and that's very important because it reminds us of how things have stayed the same over these hundreds of years, and I like that. So you guys are gifted filmmakers, so that's education. The second thing, empower the community. Now, I'm an anthropologist. That's what I do. I'm a Pan-Africanist, but when I've got my scholarly hat on, I'm an anthropologist. And one of the things that I dislike is that we trade in narratives, other people's stories. In the museums, they trade in the objects, but in the films, we also do that. So I say, when I'm working, I use a very active approach to my research. I ask people, what is it that you want? I use their voice. Tell me what you want. And so there's scope to actually go out there, if you're interacting with them, if you're doing Zooms with them, to film them and ask them, what do you want? And let them say it in their own voice, because we all think we have the solutions for everyone's problems, but we need to ask those people to tell us in their own voice what those problems are. The third thing, your next film. I want to see your next film. I want you to make it stronger, and I want to make that link between the diaspora and the continent even more potent, more powerful. Right at the end, it closed with this montage of Black Lives Matter protests, and the roads must fall and the Colston statue coming down. And one of the things that does is a little bit disingenuous. It kind of implies that That's all we're doing. That's all that the diaspora does to contribute towards the problems on the motherland. And that's completely not true. So make that link a bit stronger. Find some of those organizations that exist in the UK, that exist across the Europe, that across Americas, and actually make that link, even if it's just a short part of your next film. That would be fantastic, because that's the only thing that I felt was quite naughty, in the sense that Black Lives Matter isn't the only thing we do. And that's often rendered as a self-serving narrative of us dealing with police, deaths in police custody in the locales where we're at. The last thing, and this one is my most naughtiest of all, donate expertise. And when I say donate expertise, I say that because films, I learned this from Usman Semben. When you're a filmmaker, you've got this amazing ability to hold people captive for a certain period of time without them interrupting. I mean, it's a very powerful, you know, like tool you have. They can object to it afterwards, but during that space, you've got this brilliant opportunity to teach, to educate, to heal, to do all that work. So one of the things that you did in this film, which I loved, was that you dealt with the politics, you dealt with the emotional, you even dealt with the spiritual, which is why I'm giving you kudos. But what you didn't deal with, you know, you scattergun it, was the economics. And we need that economic analysis. I'm not an economist, but one of the things that I do know is that Britain just recently published money. I mean, every nation state in Europe just publishes their own bonds. They just manufacture money. So when we're tied in this idea of transactional thinking, that, you know, if we spend a lot of money, then we must tax the people more. You know, if this comes from Africa, then we must do this, and all that is nonsense. We need an economic expert to actually talk about this and just slot it into the film. It could be in the first 15 minutes, in the last 15 minutes. But then what happens is that this becomes a solution, because all of a sudden we start critiquing different ways of thinking about our world. That's the only dimension that that's the thing that I would like to know more about, economics, because I hate it. I'm anti-capitalist to the heart, but that's the 4 things I would suggest as solutions. I'm gonna shut up now.
Thank you so much, Twain. Thank you. Bertrand, any closing remarks from yourself, sir?
Well, I'm not going to speak for Africa, but I'd like to say that there is, this story was 120 years ago. 60 years have been under colonization, 60 years pretty much evenly after colonization. Now the next 60 years have got to be another step, another step where colonization can be put into the history book with more honesty, more truth, and also more reconciliation and rebuilding. And I think there are some fabulous voices from the region, like Ampateba, who are showing the way still. And I think that's the kind of future I hope. And you know, that part of the world is going to face terrible difficulties because of climate change that the people of Niger, Mali have not contributed to. So I think this is the next big challenge. But the next big challenge is hopefully going to be based on truth.
Thank you, Bertrand. Paul, solutions, healing, moving forward, upliftment.
From what Bertrand said, I believe the past is all that makes the present coherent, and furthermore, that the past will remain horrible as long as we refuse to assess it honestly. Quote from James Baldwin. We really need to get this assessment tool going on. And this film, the documentary, is a dynamic role in that assessment. I was just going online and looking at the work of Mr. Paul. And please stop using Paul as a name, because that hurt, man. It hurt. I was all right though, because Bolton Wanderers were our deadly enemies growing up for Blackburn Rovers. So I just took it that Femi was being personal to me and attacking me. So I was able to handle that. But in seriousness,
I'm coming to get you, Paul.
Don't say that. They did that when I was 13. So anyway, but the serious note, where the focus goes when we talk about economics, etc. The women of Africa have kept our bellies full, the warriors' bellies full, even down to the washerwomen in the Crusades, etc. Looking and focusing on the role of women womanhood, motherhood, the golden thread. I can go on for ages on that, but I'll just say that to me is it combines the role of my mother with the role of lineage, full stop. And that's where I think we need to go as a starting with the analysis. We have to think about things differently. And that's where it can be, is to challenge the misogyny and patriarchy of the content of this culture that we're actually in now. And what you did in showing, I've got a whole thing I'd love to be able to explore about the difference between Hausa and the other dominant cultural forces in that region. I love the fact you put that thing about the feminine principle there, and going to climbing the hill to go and talk to the mother was brilliant. In the baobab tree as well. All of those things, that to me is where it's at. And I thank you from my heart for that thing. I thought your work was brilliant. And didn't like it. Didn't like the documentary. You made me feel really, really bad. But it's beautiful. It has to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Brother Leader Mbendaka, I know this is your area. Solutions, upliftment, healing, the way forward for Africa at home and abroad.
Tendai I too want to commend the work that was done to put the film together, and for bringing that information, connecting us, as I said in my opening remarks, to that particular part of our beloved motherland, so that we have an insight into the history of our people in Niger. In terms of solutions, I would want to pray on the wisdom of the most eminent prophet and king, His Excellency Marcus Mosiah Garvey, as I always do, who urges us to unite, organize now or perish. I believe that is, Brother Toyin, the universal panacea, the need for us as Africans to unite and to organize. That is the fundamental principle. And further, tapping further into Papa Garvey's wisdom, emancipate yourselves from mental slavery, for none but ourselves can free our minds. You may be familiar with those words from Bob Marley's song, but those words were spoken originally by Papa Garvey. And so how do we do all of this in substance? The great thing about the legacy of the most eminent prophet and king, His Excellency Marcus Mosiah Garvey, is that he gave us the black print for our liberation. He demonstrated to us how to transform vision into programmized action. And that's what we need to do. So we need to study the legacy of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. We need to study the legacy of Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah, so that we can have a sense of how they went about organizing African people, drawing together the skills and the resources and the agency of African people to build a global movement in the case of Papa Garvey, and in the case of Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah, a national and continental movement that he intended to inspire the entire African world. We've got to start thinking big. We need the momentum we need to revive the momentum of the 1960s. We need a powerful global movement. These are very, very challenging times for us as African people. And the solution lies in our ability to work together, not necessarily to like each other, but to understand that there is a need for us to work together, and that there's a need for us to be organized. As the saying goes, an army of 10 will defeat a am I saying it right? Yes, an army of 10 will defeat a rabble of 1,000. And the problem too often with us as African people is that we have wonderful ideas, great skills and a range of abilities, but we are not organized. And Papa Garvey says that the greatest weapon used against the African is the weapon of disorganization. So we can say whatever we like. We can have the most wonderful ideas. If we lack the ability to come together and strategically plan together and build institutions together that are designed by Africans for and in the interest of Africans, then we will lose this war. We will lose this battle, and we are indeed at war. Can I just say very quickly, Brother Femi?
Yes, go ahead. You can finish off.
I hope that you will receive the compliments and embrace the compliments that you've got this evening, as well as the constructive criticisms, because I could feel the love, your love for your people. I could feel your pain, and be sure that when the brothers and sisters, when the brothers challenged you about your apparent aloofness, they were actually saying to you, we recognize that you are one of us. We expect you to feel the way we feel. There was no division or demarcation between you and them. That's what they were saying. They were embracing you in totality. But I can say that I could feel you, my brother, but I understand that you were being also professional. You were putting your best professional foot forward, but I could see and sense that you were feeling this thing. So, we embrace you and we love you for what you tried to do. Like all of us, we can always do better. And we hope that you will take the good and the successful bits of what you did in this film forward and improve upon what you might yourself agree on reflection were shortcomings. Tendai Mwari.
Thank you.
Africa, to the God of Africa be the glory. Tendai Mwari.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for those uplifting words. So over to you, Rob. Any closing remarks, sir?
No, I just really want to say thank you so much to all of you for watching the film and having so many interesting ideas that come from it. And I think it's a period that we're going into now where really as you have all really been emphasizing, it's time for genuine self-determination in the future, in a time. I think one thing that I would say in our film, but probably we kind of slightly put nods to it in terms of a symbolic thing, is I think in terms of, Niger, this could be said of many other countries, but Niger is a country that could be energy self-sufficient with solar energy. We talk about that in the film. And if there is a way of being able to do that for all the countries in that part of Africa, rather than be creating energy that would be maybe be going off to Europe, this would be a very important part of, I think, ways to go forward. And I hope that will be something that becomes discussed as this film goes forward and as these issues go forward, really.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you very much to all of you for your magnificent comments and interesting insights and inspiring ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. And Femi, over to yourself, sir.
Yeah, thank you everyone for the discussion. And I'm just very, really happy to see these discussions happening off the basis of the project and the fact that we're coming together and we are and it's kind of sparking discussion. And I definitely take on board some of the criticisms. I think for sure what Amma has said is true. It doesn't shorten the film at all to just have in the bottom left hand of the corner the person's name, so that they can point at the film when they can say to the film, to their daughter or something, "Oh, I'm in this film," and for sure in the future, I mean, I've been thinking about maybe one of the projects. I mean, I've been looking at stuff like the Underman in Sudan, and maybe even Angola, and something about Queen Nzinga, and the great force of resistance which was shown there, and the rest. And so I definitely think that there is a need, and hopefully I can help in my future projects to bring out the stories of resistance, as well as the stories of suffering. As we've all heard before, history of Africa didn't start with slavery, and even after slavery came into place, the history of Africa doesn't constitute the history of slavery. So there's plenty of stuff to explore.
Thank you, Femi. So I'd like to thank our audience, whether you was partaking or watching or listening via various streaming outlets, be that YouTube or Twitter or whatever the case may be. Thank you so much for participating and watching this evening. I would also like to thank our panelists once again. Rob, you can take yourself off mute. Come and give yourself a round of applause. Rob, Femi.
Thank you.
Well done all.
Paul, there you go. Toyin.
Bertrand's gone.
Is he gone? Otis, Lewimbo, and brother leader Mbendaka. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank once again the partners that were involved in the screening this evening, which is the BFI Doc Society Fund, Bertha Foundation, BBC Arena, and also we've got to big up, and you've all got to give Sister Priscilla Igwe a massive round of applause from the New Black Film Collective in organising not just tonight, but every single night of screening and panel discussions. So big up Sister Priscilla. I know you're hiding there in the background. I believe you should come forward, but I know you're not going to.
She's lurking. She's a lurker.
But thank you so much, Sister Priscilla. It's been an honor and a pleasure. I'm Brother Hakeem. I've been your host for this evening. It's been an honor to be in such an august body of knowledge and upliftment and inspiration. So thank you all. And please, everybody, log on to search out the New Black Film Collective online. There's going to be other screenings of African Apocalypse in the new year. Depending what the COVID situation is, there's also going to be in-person screenings and panel discussions. And also the film will be used to highlight different and various community campaigns, from reparations to different aspects of social justice. So please, please, please check out the New Black Film Collective online, and you'll be kept informed via New Black Film Collective's website. Rob, I don't know if you want to highlight the film's website, and Femi?
Oh, it's AfricanApocalypseFilm.com.
Thank you.
AfricanApocalypseFilm.com. And there's lots of other information there so far. And with some of the ideas from tonight, especially from Toyin and Brother Leader and Otis and Paul, I think we'll be putting a lot of extra bits in as well for people to see as time goes forward.
I've got to say, the beheading of the cow.
You've always got to say, Paul.
The beheading of the cow. Apocalypse Now. I got it. No, it wasn't lost. So yeah.
Okay. All right, Paul. Thank you. So thank you all once again. Have a safe and pleasant evening. Have a good weekend. Peace. Bless.
Cheers. Bye.